The shoebox was wedged behind the winter coats on the highest shelf of my mother's closet, where she kept things she didn't want found by accident but couldn't bring herself to throw away. My name was written across the lid in pencil. Not ink, pencil, the way she used to label my school books when I was a boy, soft enough to erase if she ever changed her mind. I almost didn't open it. I'd already been through 4 boxes that afternoon, and my back ached, and the light outside the window was going gray and flat the way it does in late October. But something about the pencil stopped me. She never wrote my name in pencil unless she meant to come back to it. My mother's name was Irene, though almost no one called her that by the time I was grown. To everyone in town, she was just Mrs. Calloway, the woman who ran the flowers stall outside the post office for 19 years and could tell you, without looking, which of her regulars had had a bad week by the flowers they chose. She had a way of being warm to nearly everyone: neighbors, strangers, the postman, the boy who delivered her groceries, that I used to take a quiet, childish pride in. My mother is liked, I remember thinking. People are glad when she walks into a room. And they were. It was only with me, in certain specific and narrow ways, that something in her seemed to close like a hand. I don't mean she was cold to me. That isn't right, and it would be unfair to say it. Because for most of my childhood, she was the warmest thing in the house. Softer than my father in every way that mattered. The one who sat up with me when I was sick, who knew exactly how I liked my eggs, who hummed under her breath while she worked in the garden in a way that made the whole yard feel safe. What I mean is that there were certain rooms in her, certain doors, that she kept closed. And as a boy, I learned without ever being told which doors those were. If I asked about my father, what he was like before he died, what he sounded like, whether he'd been proud of things, she would answer in short, smooth sentences, the kind that close a subject rather than open it. And then she would find something for her hands to do. Refold a dish towel that didn't need refolding. Move a chair an inch and then move it back. My father died, I was told, when I was 9. A illness, that was the word she used. Illness, vague and total. The kind of word that doesn't invite follow-up questions from a 9-year-old. I remember being sad in the abstract way children are sad about things they don't fully understand. More affected by my mother's face than by any loss of my own. Because the truth is, I barely remembered him. I had a handful of fragments, the smell of pipe tobacco, a green car, a deep voice in another room, and very little else. My mother kept no photographs of him out. There was one in a drawer in the hall table that I found once as a boy and looked at for a long time before putting it carefully back exactly where I'd found it. Because some instinct told me I wasn't supposed to have seen it. There was a phrase my mother used, more than once, when I was growing up, usually when I'd asked about something she didn't want to discuss. Not just my father, but other things too. The kind of things that live in every family's unspoken corners. She'd go quiet for a moment, and then she'd say, gently, but with a finality that even as a child I understood not to push against. Some things are easier to carry if you don't open them. I must have heard her say that a dozen times over the years, about a dozen different things, and I never once thought to ask her what she meant by it, or whether she was talking about the thing I'd asked about, or about herself. I left home at 18 for college, came back for holidays for a while, and then less, the way most people do, not from any falling out. Just the ordinary drift of a life filling up with its own concerns. I married Diane when I was 26. We had 2 children, then grandchildren. My mother came to the wedding, came to christenings, sat at the head of the table at Thanksgiving in the house I grew up in. Right up until the year everything between us stopped. It happened when I was 42. My father-in-law had died that spring, and in the slow business of settling his estate, I'd found myself, almost by accident, dealing with a great deal of old paperwork. Insurance records, certificates, the bureaucratic residue a life leaves behind. Somewhere in the course of that, for reasons I no longer remember clearly, something to do with a life insurance policy of my own, a beneficiary form, a clerk asking for documentation. I needed my father's death certificate. I called the county records office. It took them about a week to get back to me, and when they did, they read me out a date. It wasn't the date I expected. It was 11 years later than the year I had grown up believing he died. I sat with that for a long time before I said anything to anyone. I checked it twice, called back, gave them his full name and date of birth again, made them confirm it a second time, in case there had been some clerical mistake, some other man with the same name. There hadn't been. According to the county, my father had been alive, somewhere, doing something, being someone, for 11 years after the year my mother told everyone, that he had died. I drove to my mother's house that same evening. I don't remember much of the drive. I remember standing in her kitchen with my coat still on, and I remember saying it plainly, without any of the softening a kinder version of myself might have managed. That I knew, that I'd called the county, that I knew he hadn't died when she said he had, and I wanted to know why she had spent 33 years letting me believe my father was dead when he wasn't. She didn't deny it. That's the thing I've come back to most in the years since. She didn't deny it, didn't try to explain it away, didn't reach for any of the small evasions she might have reached for. She just stood very still by the stove, with her hands folded in front of her, and didn't say anything at all. The silence went on long enough that I filled it myself, and not kindly. I asked her, and I can still hear my own voice saying it, flat and cold in a way I'd never spoken to her before. Did you even love him? Or did you just want him gone? And a dead man was easier to explain than a man who left. She still didn't say anything. She looked at me, and there was something in her face I didn't have a name for then, and have spent 22 years trying to find a name for since. And then she looked down at her hands, and I took that silence, that long, terrible silence, as confirmation of the worst thing I could have thought about her. I told her I needed time. I told her not to call me. I walked out of that kitchen, and I did not go back. Not for birthdays, not for holidays, not for the ordinary small occasions that make up a relationship. For 22 years, my sister Carol kept in touch with her, of course. Carol and I spoke maybe twice a year, carefully, with an unspoken agreement not to bring up the subject of our mother unless there was news that couldn't be avoided. A hospital stay, a fall, and finally, this past September, the call I'd been bracing for without ever quite believing it would come. My mother died in her sleep, in the house she'd lived in for 50 years, at 86. Carol and I went together to clear it out. It was Carol who found the shoebox, actually. She was the one going through the closet while I worked in the study. And she came and found me in the hallway holding it out with both hands, the way you'd carry something that might spill. She asked me not to give you this until she was gone, Carol said. She made me promise. Years ago, right after. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Right after had only ever meant one thing between us for 22 years. I took the box from her and carried it into the front room and set it on the table my mother used to keep her sewing things on, and I sat down across from it. And for a while I didn't open it at all. I just looked at my name on the lid, in pencil, in her handwriting, which had gotten shakier in recent years but was still unmistakably hers. The same hand that had written my name on lunch bags and library cards, and the inside covers of school books 40 and 50 years ago. I ran my thumb across the letters. The graphite smudged slightly under my touch, the way pencil does after enough time, and some part of me didn't want to disturb it any further. I sat there with my hand resting on the lid for what must have been 10 minutes before I finally lifted it off. Inside were 22 envelopes, standing upright in 2 neat rows, each one slightly yellowed, each one sealed. On the front of each, in the same pencil, was a date. And I realized, looking at the first one, that the dates were all the same day and month, different years. My birthday, 22 birthdays, starting the year after I walked out of her kitchen, and ending, I felt something tighten in my chest when I saw it. This past June, 2 months before she died, she had written to me every single year for 22 years and never sent a single one. I took out the first envelope, the oldest one, the year after the fight, and held it for a long moment without opening it. The paper had a particular smell, the smell of a closet that's been closed for decades, cedar and something floral underneath it, the same smell that had always been in her house, in her cardigans, in the car on the drive to school. I turned the envelope over twice, then I set it down again, unopened, and went and made myself a cup of tea I didn't really want, because I wasn't ready yet. And some part of me, the part that had learned its habits from her, needed something for my hands to do first. When I came back, I opened it. The first letter was short, barely half a page, and it was, more than anything, an apology, though not for the thing I'd have expected. She didn't apologize for the lie about my father, not directly, not yet. She apologized for the silence in the kitchen. "I should have said something," she wrote. "I had 33 years to find the right words, and I had none of them ready when you finally asked. I'm sorry for that more than I can say. I don't know if I'll ever send this, but I wanted to write it down while it's still fresh, so that one day, if there's ever a day, I won't have to find the words from scratch." She signed it, simply, Mom. And beneath her name, she had written 4 words that I would come to recognize over the next several hours as something close to a refrain. It was for you. I read that first letter twice, then I put it down on the table, carefully, face up, and I sat back in the chair and looked at the window for a while. It had started to rain, not heavily, just a thin gray rain against the glass, the kind that doesn't seem to be falling so much as simply present in the air. And I watched it for longer than I meant to. I thought about the version of this story I had been carrying for 22 years, that my mother's silence in the kitchen had been an admission, that her stillness had meant she had nothing to say, because there was nothing defensible to say. And here was a letter, written less than a year after that night. That suggested something different. Not an absence of words, but an excess of them, more than she could organize into anything that would come out right. I opened the second letter, then the third. I told myself I'd just read a few, get a sense of them, and then stop for the day. But that isn't what happened. The early letters were mostly like the first, careful, a little formal, full of small news about her life that she had no way of knowing whether I'd ever read. The flower stall, a neighbor's new dog, a hard winter. They read like letters to someone she was afraid had stopped existing, or might stop reading at any moment, and so she kept them light. Each one ended the same way. It was for you. It was the 5th letter, written 4 years after the fight, where something shifted. In it, she mentioned, almost in passing, that Carol had shown her a photograph of my daughter Sophie's high school graduation. "She looks so much like you did at that age," my mother wrote. The same way of standing with her weight on one leg, like she's not sure she wants to be in the photo at all. I sat with that for a moment. Sophie's graduation had been small, a handful of family, and I hadn't sent any photographs to my mother. I hadn't sent her anything in 4 years, which meant Carol had been quietly carrying photographs back and forth between us the entire time, a kind of underground correspondence neither of us had ever acknowledged to the other. I thought of all the family events my mother had not been invited to, and pictured her, afterward, looking at photographs of them in her kitchen, learning the shape of her grandchildren's lives one borrowed picture at a time. I got up and walked to the window. The rain had picked up slightly. I stood there for a while with my arms crossed, not really looking at anything, and then I went back to the table and gathered the letters I'd already read into a neat stack, squaring the edges against each other the way you square a deck of cards, lining up the dates so they sat in order. It didn't need doing. I did it anyway. Then I picked up the 6th letter. The middle letters, the ones from the years when I was in my late 40s and early 50s, were where I started to notice something else. They were no longer just news. They had begun, very gradually, circling something. In the 9th letter, written the year I turned 51, she wrote, "I keep starting to tell you about your father, the real version, not the one you were given. And I keep stopping myself, because every time I try, I end up writing about the night in March instead of writing to you, and that isn't fair to either of us." The night in March. I read that sentence 3 times. I had no idea what night in March she meant. There was no date attached to it, no year. Just those 4 words, dropped into the middle of an otherwise ordinary letter like a stone into still water. And then the letter moved on to something else entirely, as if she'd caught herself and changed the subject mid-thought. I put that letter down and didn't pick up the next one immediately. I went into the kitchen, my mother's kitchen, with its old yellow tiles and the clock that had always run 4 minutes fast. And I stood at the counter and ran the tap for a while, filling a glass of water I didn't drink. The night in March. I turned the phrase over. I had no memory that attached to it. And that, more than anything in the letters so far, unsettled me. The sense that there was a memory I was supposed to have, that belonged to me, that I didn't have access to. The 12th letter, written when I was 54, mentioned the night in March again, this time with slightly more detail, though still carefully, still circling. "You were 6, she wrote. You wouldn't remember it, or you'd remember it the way I taught you to remember it, which isn't the same thing. I used to rehearse it with you, in the weeks after, the way you'd say it if anyone asked. I told myself I was protecting you. I still believe that, but I know now it also meant you grew up with a hole where a memory should have been, and you filled that hole with the only thing I gave you to fill it with, which was a story about a man who got sick and died. I am sorry for that. I don't know how to be sorry for it in a way that's big enough." I sat with the 12th letter for a long time. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the light had gone the particular flat silver gray of late afternoon turning toward evening. I became aware that my tea had gone cold in its cup, untouched, and I picked it up and poured it down the sink and refilled the kettle, and stood there listening to it begin to tick and hum, and I thought about the word rehearse. My mother had used the word rehearse about something that happened to me when I was 6, something I had no memory of, that she had apparently sat with me afterward and taught me how to describe, or how not to describe. Exactly. But how to not describe in a way that would hold up. I went back to the table. There were 10 letters left. I read the next several in something close to one sitting. 14, 15, 16, and they were quieter than the others, shorter, as though the effort of writing them had become heavier with each year. In the 16th, written when I was 58, she wrote only a few lines, ending with, "I'm not as sharp as I was. The doctor says it's nothing to worry about yet, just age, but I notice it. Small things slipping. I've started to worry that if I don't write this down properly soon, I might lose the ability to explain it at all, and then you'd never know, and I think that might be worse than what happened." That was the first time she'd mentioned anything about her health. I hadn't known. Of course I hadn't known. I hadn't asked. The 21st letter, written last year, was the longest one in the box by a considerable margin, 4 full pages in handwriting that was visibly less steady than in the earlier letters. The lines drifting slightly, some words retraced where her pen had hesitated. I read the postmark date on the envelope twice before I let myself open it. The way you check a clock twice before believing what it tells you, as if rereading the date might somehow prepare me for what was inside. It didn't. Nothing could have. She wrote that the night in March, when I was 6, my father had come home late, and that there had been an argument. Not the first one, she said, but the worst one, and that at some point in it, he had grabbed my arm, hard enough that something in it had broken. She wrote that she had taken me to the hospital herself, alone, at 11 at night, and told them I'd fallen down the stairs, because the alternative, telling the truth, in a town that small, about a man as respected as my father had been, felt, to a 26-year-old woman with a 6-year-old son and no money of her own, like something that would destroy both of us rather than help either of us. She wrote that she'd told my father to leave that same week, and he had, and that within a year she'd told everyone, neighbors, family, eventually me, that he had died. It was easier, she wrote, for a town to grieve a dead man than to ask questions about a living one. And it was easier for a 6-year-old to grieve a father who got sick than to carry around the truth of what his own father did to him. I made that choice in about 4 days, and then I spent the rest of my life making sure it held. And then, this was the part that stayed with me longest, the part I read over and over. She described the hospital. She described sitting beside me on the examination table while a doctor set my arm, and how I'd been quiet and brave in the way small children sometimes are when they don't yet understand what's happened to them, and how, in the car on the way home, she had turned to me, 6 years old, arm in a cast, half asleep against the window, and said gently, "The way you teach a child a poem. You fell down the stairs. That's what happened. Can you say it back to me?" And she wrote that I had said it back to her, in a small sleepy voice, and that she had made me say it 3 more times before we got home, until it came out smooth and unremarkable, like something true. I put the letter down. I didn't pick up the last one, the 22nd, right away. I sat for a long time with my hands flat on the table, the way you might sit with your hands flat on something to keep it from moving. There was a sensation in my left forearm. My left arm, I realized, the one that had been broken, that I can only describe as a kind of static, a faint electrical hum just under the skin, though there was nothing actually wrong with it, nothing that hadn't been there my whole life. I have no memory of that night. I want to be honest about that. Reading her account didn't unlock some buried scene, didn't produce a flood of recovered memory the way it sometimes does in stories. There was no scene to recover. There was only the knowledge now that there had been one, and that I had spent 58 years without it, carrying instead the smooth, unremarkable, rehearsed version she had built for me in the back of a car on a March night when I was 6 years old. I got up and went outside. I don't know why. It had stopped raining entirely by then, and the air was cold and smelled of wet leaves, and I stood on my mother's back step in my shirt sleeves, with my arms wrapped around myself, looking at her garden, overgrown now. Nobody had kept it up in the last year, and I stayed out there long enough that Carol came and found me, and asked, carefully, if I was all right, and I told her I was, which wasn't true, but it was the only answer I had. When I went back inside, there was one letter left, the 22nd, written this past June, 2 months before she died. It was shorter than the 21st, much shorter, just over a page, and her handwriting in it was the least steady of all of them. Several words crossed out and rewritten. She didn't return to the story of my father or the night in March. She wrote instead about the shoebox itself, about the decision, finally, to let Carol give it to me when she was gone, rather than try to deliver it herself, because, she wrote, I think I would lose my courage at the last minute, the way I have every other time. And I think you deserve to read all of this at once, in order, the way I wrote it. Not have it handed to you in pieces over some difficult conversation neither of us would survive. She wrote that she didn't expect forgiveness, and that she wasn't sure, even now, whether what she'd done all those years ago, the lie about the hospital, the lie about my father's death, the lie she'd taught a 6-year-old to tell about his own arm, had been the right choice, or simply the choice she'd been able to live with. I've gone back and forth on it for 58 years, she wrote, and I still don't know. I only know that I would do it again, and that not knowing whether that makes me right or wrong is something I'll have to carry without you. Now, since you won't be here to carry it with me. And then, at the bottom of the page, the same 4 words. It was for you. But this time, she had added a line beneath them, smaller, almost an afterthought. I know that doesn't make it yours to forgive. I just needed somewhere to put it down. I sat with the 22nd letter for a long time. I thought I was finished. I genuinely believed, sitting there at my mother's sewing table with 22 opened envelopes spread in front of me in their neat rows, that I had reached the bottom of it, that whatever else there was to feel, at least the facts of it were complete. I began, almost automatically, to gather the letters back into their box, squaring the edges, putting them back in order by year, the way you tidy a room after bad news because your hands need a task and your mind has nothing useful left to do. It was, while I was doing that, while I was lifting the stack, to set it back in the box, that I noticed the box wasn't empty underneath. There was something else at the bottom, beneath where the letters had been standing upright. A folded piece of newspaper, yellowed, much older looking than the letters themselves, and beneath that, a small bundle of photographs held together with a rubber band that had perished and stuck slightly to the top photograph. The newspaper clipping was an obituary, not my father's death certificate. I'd already confirmed that date with the county years ago, in the worst week of my life. This was a notice from a newspaper in a town 2 states away, dated just 3 years ago. My father's name, my father's date of birth, which matched, and a date of death, 3 years ago, at the age of 81, in a care facility. Survived by no immediate family that the notice mentioned, 3 years ago. My mother had kept this clipping, folded at the bottom of a box with my name on it, for 3 years. Underneath the clipping, the photographs told the rest of it, though it took me a while to understand what I was looking at. They were photographs of a man, elderly, thin, in a wheelchair in some of them, sitting on a bench in a garden in others, and in several of them, an elderly woman sat beside him, my mother. Some of the photographs had dates written on the back, in pencil, in her handwriting, spanning a period of about 6 years. Visits. My mother had been visiting my father, the man who broke my arm when I was 6, the man she had spent 52 years telling the world, and me was already dead, in a care home, 2 states away, for the last 6 years of his life, alone, telling no one. I sat very still for a long time after that. Carol came in at some point and saw the clipping and the photographs spread on the table and went quiet, and sat down across from me, and neither of us said anything for a while. Eventually, she said, carefully, that she'd known Mom took a trip to see an old friend a few times a year, for years, and had never thought much of it. Mom had always been vague about it, and Carol had never pushed. I don't think Carol had any more idea than I did what those trips actually were. I got up and went to the kitchen and washed the mug I'd used for tea, even though it was already clean, rinsing it under the tap for longer than it needed, watching the water run over it. I think I understand now, a little better than I did an hour earlier, what my mother meant when she wrote, "It was for you." Not just about the night in March, and not just about the lie that followed it, but about this too. She had gone, alone, for 6 years, to sit with the man who hurt her son in the last years of his life, in a place 2 states away where nobody who knew either of us would ever see her. And I think she did it so that if I ever went looking for him, the way people sometimes do, late in life, when old wounds start asking questions again, there would be nothing left to find. No address, no reunion, no version of that story where I show up somewhere, 58 years old, looking for an explanation from a man who couldn't give me one, and find instead an old woman already sitting there, having long since had whatever conversation there was to have, on my behalf, without me. It's been a few weeks now. I've read all 22 letters several times. I keep them in the shoebox, on a shelf in my own closet, though not at the back. I keep meaning to find a better place for them and haven't yet. Sophie came over last week, and we sat at my kitchen table, and I told her some of it, not all of it, not yet, but some, and at one point she asked me whether I was angry, and I found that I genuinely didn't know how to answer her. I'm not angry. I don't think I'm not angry either. What I mostly feel is something closer to the sensation of standing in a room you thought you knew the shape of, and discovering it's larger than you realized, and that there were doors in it you never noticed because you'd never had a reason to look for them. I think about the night in March sometimes, not as a memory, because I don't have one, but as a fact I now carry, the way you carry the knowledge of a scar you can't feel anymore, but can still see in the mirror. And I think about the car ride home from the hospital, my mother's voice, gentle, patient, asking a 6-year-old to say something back to her until it came out smooth. "You fell down the stairs. Can you say it back to me?" I think about how that sentence was, in its way, the first thing she ever wrote on me in pencil, soft enough to erase. She must have hoped, though it never was. Not really. It just went somewhere I couldn't see it. And 58 years later, she handed it back to me, in ink this time, in her own failing handwriting, in a shoebox with my name on the lid. Also in pencil, I noticed again, when I finally put the lid back on. Still soft enough, even now, that some part of her must have hoped I might still be able to set it down. I haven't decided yet what I believe about any of it. Whether what she did was right, or merely survivable, or whether those are even different things. I don't think I'm going to decide quickly, and I've stopped expecting myself to. But I took the shoebox home with me, and I put it on the shelf in my own closet. And last week, without entirely planning to, I found myself in the stationery aisle of the hardware store, standing in front of a rack of pencils for longer than a man my age has any reason to stand in front of a rack of pencils. I bought a box of them. I haven't used them yet. I'm not sure what I'll write, or who it will be for, or whether I'll ever give it to anyone at all. But I bought them anyway, and they're sitting on my desk now. And some evenings I find myself looking at them the way I imagine she must have looked at that shoebox for 22 years, deciding, and not deciding, and deciding again.